Hi, I'm Tyson Franklin, and welcome to this week's episode of the Podiatry Legends Podcast. Well, actually, this is a book review that I am doing with my friend Richard Chasen. Now, Richard was back on episode 337, and it was titled The Worthy Rival. And when we were talking about that, Richard mentioned a book called The Infinite Game. And he was very gracious and he sent me a copy. When I got the book and I had a look through it, I said, Richard, we should do a book review on this. And we thought it'd be a fantastic way for people to start the new year, get this book and actually have a read of it. So, Richard, how are you doing today?
As always, after one of your intros,
Yeah.
fantastic.
So let's dive into this book review. And I'll just point out to people that these book review episodes have been very popular. I've done 8 in the past with Carly O'Donoghue, and we're going to be doing some more in 2025 as well. So stay tuned. And like I say to people, if you find a book that you think is absolutely fantastic, send me a copy. And if I like it, then we can do a book review together. I love reading.
I'll
And this
send you more
book
because I
is a
like
ripper.
talking. So,
Yeah. And this book is really good. I'll let you explain the premise of what the book is basically about.
okay, so basically, The Infinite Game is written by a guy called Simon Sinek, who some people will know, some people won't yet. If you want to get an idea of who he is, he did one of the most popular TED Talks of all time called Start With Why. And so his first book was Start With Why, and then he's got a whole bunch in that space like Leaders Eat Last and that kind of thing. And so the infinite game is about the concept of being in business for the long term, but it's basically it's saying that business and life in general. So it doesn't have to be if you don't have to be a company owner for this. It can be anything you're doing. Finite games are like a soccer game. Everybody agrees to the rules. Everybody's playing the same way. There are clear breaches of them, which you're
Mm.
not allowed to do, and so on. There's an end point. You know when it's over. But business is not
And
like
there's a
that.
winner and a
And a
loser.
loser. Yeah.
That's the
Or you play
important
again
part
the
with
next week.
with a
Yeah,
finite game. There's always a winner and a loser.
absolutely. And everybody knows that they're playing the game.
Mm.
Whereas in business, you never win at business. You never win at life. You can accomplish a lot. You can set a lot in motion that somebody else will then take, and they won't complete it either, but they will keep doing the work and somebody else will. And eventually it just continues on and it gets into the legacy stage of things. And along the way, you're advancing a cause. Now you can advance the cause with the infinite game because you've got no endpoint. You just have things you're driving towards, and it's really and the only real barometer is it's like a GPS. Is it taking me closer to where I want to get to, or is it taking me away from where I want to get to, or just slowing me down? And so Simon goes through a lot of. We're very close. I call him Simon now, but he goes through a
Yeah.
lot of. He goes through a lot of.
Carly and I used to do that too. Whenever we were talking about one of the authors, we'd always go by the first name because we felt like we knew them.
That's right.
Once you
Actually,
dig
I
into the
have two
books,
degrees of separation because one of my patients knows him quite well, but he doesn't know about me unless he gets sore
not
feet
yet.
one day. Not yet. However, the what he does is he goes through examples of why what we really should be working towards is the infinite aspect, sowing a legacy, doing some good, and advancing what's important. And that's how you get other people involved. So one of the principles for the infinite game is that anybody who wants to contribute to it can contribute to it. So, and there's some great examples along the way. When he was talking about the internet game, the best examples he used were, for example, Apple versus Microsoft,
Yeah.
which is a perfect example because it went through a bunch of iterations to the point whereby, I mean, Steve Jobs, as you know, got fired from his own company in 1997. Didn't see that one coming. And he went off and did Pixar and some other stuff. And then they eventually brought him back. And when he came back, he completely revolutionized what was then a failing company. Like he was told to basically close it and give the money back to the shareholders. And instead, Apple today, as you know, is a moderate success. So
Mm, yeah,
as
they've
I
done
say that,
okay.
yeah, that's right.
Well, what's
Absolutely.
interesting though is when you talk about Apple and Microsoft, I always wonder, would they both be as good as what they are if they weren't worthy rivals?
Well, it's interesting, and we'll get straight into the worthy rival bit after this because I love that example. But the interesting thing is, at one point, one of the strategies Steve Jobs used when he came back, he took all of their products and he whittled it down to 4 categories and said, right, we are only doing MacBooks, we're only doing iPhones. Like some of them didn't exist yet. He hadn't released the iPhone or the iPod. In fact, Microsoft had a much better music player called the Zune. And early on, Simon Sinek spoke for both Apple and Microsoft, and he, as a gift, he got given a Zune, and it was this fascinating, nifty little MP3 player. And he was in the back of a taxi with an Apple executive afterwards. He said, and he just had to stir the pot, as he called it. So he said, I just have to tell you, I spoke for Microsoft and they gave me a Zune, and it is the best MP3 player I've ever had. And the Apple executive smiled and said, I have no doubt. And left it at that. So interestingly, in the early days of Steve Jobs' comeback, he got a $150 million bailout loan from Microsoft to help them along the way. And it was a fantastic example of people advancing each other in the same space. So the idea of the worthy rival, which I think is like chapter 9 in the book, was where you get a bunch of people and they work in the same space, but they're not competitors, they're rivals. They show each other how you could do something better that they may be doing differently to you, but their way is really working and you never thought of it that way. And they can do the same thing from you. And so you sort of spur each other on without actively trying to beat one another because, again, if it's infinite, you can't really win. A lot of you playing different games.
Yeah. Well, the podiatrists I know that have the most successful businesses are usually the ones that do not look at other podiatrists as competitors. They look at them as if they have a worthy rival, and they push each other to keep improving, getting better, be a better podiatrist, have a better business. And they're watching each other and they normally get along. It's the podiatrists who think everybody is a competitor and they think when they win, that means the other person must be losing. And I think that also comes back to whether you think the world is full of abundance or the world or this scarcity.
Yeah.
And
If
people
you
have
have
a scarcity mentality will always think it's a finite game. There has to be a winner and loser.
Yeah. I was going to say, sorry to cut you off, but if
No, that's
you
right.
if you have a scarcity mentality, you're definitely playing a finite game.
Mm.
You're looking at the balance sheet, and if you're better than last year, then you're better, and if you're worse than last year, and people with finite mentality would have struggled in COVID because they would have said, "Well, our turnover is down." Of course it is. Nobody's open, at least in
Yeah.
Melbourne. But having said that, if you had an infinite game, if you had an infinite mentality, what you might have done is said, okay, we can't see as many patients, so we will get by financially. But what we will do is we'll use the time to build our systems. We'll use the time to shore up the things that we don't have time to do normally, so that when we come out of this, we will be coming out of it at a much stronger level, and we'll be able to advance things. And so when we can get staff back in the office and we can train new staff, suddenly we have all the resources we didn't have before because we've taken the time to create them. So if you if you just I mean, if you're an athlete, if you're training for the sake of training, then there's no problem. If you're training
Mm.
for an event, after the event, you crash, you stop running, you put on weight, etc. It's just you don't need to do it anymore.
Yeah, and that's the
And
beginning and end where you're always thinking there's an end. But I know
absolutely,
when you mentioned about COVID too, and about the worthy rivals, to me, a lot of the podiatrists who had the right mindset that it's an infinite game, they were in communication
Mm,
with a lot of other podiatrists in their area, all trying to support each other.
yeah.
Whereas people that thought it was a finite game really stuck to themselves because they didn't want to share anything with anyone because they were so scared that they were going to lose something, and therefore, at some point, they just thought there was an
Yeah.
endpoint.
About 200 episodes ago, we were talking about karate, and there is the number of people I've seen where they get to a black belt, which
Mm.
is a color, and then, but in Japanese, you would never see black belt. You would say shodan, which means first step, and it goes on through second, third, fourth, and that. Or people degrees, dans, and so on. But the number of people I saw who got to that and thought, okay, I've reached the end, and then they quit.
Yeah,
Whereas usually it's called first step because you say, great, you've gotten this far, you've finished with the basics. Now it's worth teaching you something important. And it's the same in early on in the book, Robert McNamara, who's the Secretary of Defense for the US in the Vietnam War. Now, an interesting point he made that I didn't know was that the Americans actually won most of the battles in the Vietnam War. You wouldn't have known that, would you?
no,
And yet they lost the war. In the end, the attrition and the time was just too much in public opinion. Eventually they left, having not fulfilled their goals. And he met up with his Vietnamese counterpart, General Nguyen, who said to him, what right did you have to enter a war and know so little about your enemy? We've been fighting the Chinese for 1,000 years. What did you think you were going to do in 10? Uh,
yeah,
and that's the truth. They said, look, that's great, but for you, it was about numbers and battles, and for us, it was the People's War. We were fighting the great enemy, and everybody was involved because of that. And that's how we're still there, and you're not.
yeah.
Um,
They didn't look at it that we were gonna
no,
that it was a finite game that there's going to be a
yeah,
winner and loser. They were in the infinite game,
Yeah.
where they were just
But
going for
yeah,
as long as
absolutely.
life would take it. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was the thing, because I mean, it's by making it the people's war, they were actually doing what was in chapter 2 of the book, which is they were advancing a just cause. There was a great example of the siege of Leningrad that he used of Nikolai Vavilov. Do you remember the story? He was the guy who was the food scientist. So a lot of people have heard of the Svalbard seed bank in the far Arctic Circle, but
Yeah.
this is the first example where Vavilov was a bioscientist and he was trying to preserve food and food sources in case something catastrophic happened to the world. So the siege of Leningrad, a lot of people died of famine. Now, unbeknownst to them, in this unmarked building in the middle of town was this massive supply of potatoes and other crops and seeds and things like that.
Mm.
And these scientists, most of them include most of them died of starvation in the building where they were keeping these things because they were trying to preserve it so humanity would have a food source again. And that meant that even though they had like sacks of the things and they could have had some personal nutrition, they didn't know how long the siege was going to last. They didn't know if anyone would survive. And they said, well, we can't destroy this work because humanity will have nothing then. So they actually died of starvation with full warehouses full of food because it was too important to them that the work continued on afterwards.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's the just cause where the future
yeah,
orientated and it's going way beyond them right there and
absolutely.
now. It's going, and that even in business, it goes beyond the profits of the
Yeah.
business. So one of the other things that stood out to me in the book was when they were talking about building trusting teams, which
Mm.
was chapter 7. And they use the Navy SEALs as a
I
perfect
love that
example.
example. Yeah.
But they're saying like successful, like infinite-minded leaders, I've got this written down, create environments where people feel safe to be vulnerable, which leads to higher trust and
Mm.
collaboration. And there's a graph. We've actually got it marked in the book.
Yeah. It was context driven though, because he said, I mean, he said you could say to anybody who's the biggest asshole in the company, and everybody would say it's that guy.
Yeah.
But he was when he was doing work with the SEAL, he was saying like, how do you pick the guys that go into SEAL Team 6, the best of the best? And increasingly, the guys that go in there don't look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's a bunch of guys who are fit and maybe stocky in that, but generally they don't even look like Jocko Willink, ironically. But
I have met I met Jocko.
yeah, what's he like in person?
He's a beast.
He must be.
Yeah, I've got a photo. I've got a photo with him. This is going back a few years ago in Arizona, and we had lunch with
Black
him.
Ops, isn't it?
Yeah,
Oh,
it was a business black ops. We had lunch with him, and he looks like when you're watching a movie, you're thinking if a Navy SEAL come
yeah.
busting through the door and smashed it off the hinges, what would he look like? He would look
Yeah.
like Jocko.
Now, the thing is, you look at someone like Jocko Willink, who just because that you'll probably send this to and you'll listen to it, but you look at him and your first thought is that he must be just an operator, like one of the guys that goes and kicks in doors, and you wouldn't realize he's an officer and
Oh,
he's
he's super
commanding all the other
smart,
guys.
super smart,
Absolutely. I've read
super
his
smart.
books. He's very good and very structured in his thought process. And what Simon Sinek was talking about was how the sort of like you've got to be as in the graph on a certain level you've got to be competent in what you do, but on the other axis you've got to be who do I trust with my life
Mm,
is in one sense, and who do I trust with like my money and my wife, like when we're not in combat,
yeah,
can I trust you the rest of the time? Because you kind of want the guy who's high on both axes, and you can take someone who's not as good because once you get to SEAL Team 6 everyone is good. I mean, no question. but
they're going to be
but
technically sound. They don't have to be technically the
absolutely.
best, but
Yeah.
if you trust that, if there's a massive level of trust,
Yeah.
but technically they may not be as
Yeah.
great. I know right now I've worked with people that I trust 100%, may not have, but were they the greatest podiatrists in
Yeah.
the world? Maybe they weren't, but
Mm.
you knew they were going to get the job done.
Mm. I had this the other day. Somebody rang my office and they wanted to talk to me, but they said, I've been recommended to you, but I've booked in somewhere else. And I want to know what's better. I see you can make your orthotics on site and then send them off from that. What's better about that? I said, you've already booked in somewhere else. Go there. They're good.
Yeah.
He said, no, but I've heard you're better. I said, okay, great. So imagine I'm a 3 Michelin star chef and you're hungry. Do you need the Michelin star? Do you just need a restaurant?
Yeah.
You booked in somewhere else. They're going to do a good job. You asked him where it was. I said, great. They're friends of mine. I trust them. I'd go there, go there. Shortly afterwards, for some reason, the guy rang back and booked in with me. So I actually had to explain that to my friend. I have no idea why. But the truth is that you want to not have to protect the guys in your SEAL team, as they were saying. You don't want to know they can do their basic things. But at a
Mm.
certain level, you don't have to have somebody who can change history. You just need to have somebody who will still be there at the end with you. And at the same time, you want to know that they're going to be there at the end. They're not going to just leave you there and save their own skin because you've got a job to do. But you also have to get back to your family in your hometown after that.
But I think that's
And
part of the whole leadership, though, is you're building a trusting
mm,
team. So over a period of time, as people are joining your business, you want to make sure that the people who are already in your business, you need
mm,
to look after them by making sure that everybody you introduce into that
mm,
has got to fit, has
mm.
got to fit the group. And I think
See,
as a leader, and that's why I get disappointed sometimes when I know some podiatrists are so desperate to employ someone, they'll just grab anybody, put a podiatry hat on, and throw them
and they'll
amongst
make
their
it fit.
team.
Yeah,
And it's like trying to ram a square peg in a round hole. They don't
yeah,
fit. And then they disrupt the whole team. And even the
yeah,
team then looks at the leader and goes, is this really what, is this how you
yeah.
see us?
It's difficult because the culture, I mean, like, the culture can be so fragile. If you let anybody in, you're changing it without
Yeah.
really. I mean, like we're very strong on that at the moment. We're very picky about who we let into the family, and it's not a family. You don't fire family, but
Yeah.
it's at the same time it's a relationship, and you want to have people that you can trust afterwards. Because I mean, like the people who work with me have keys to the business. They have alarm codes. They have people they can tell about what we do here and there. You want to have
It's true.
people who are going to want to be here and see themselves as doing more, and you want to, and everybody that we have has a career plan because of that. So even the people working reception as their uni job have an endpoint. They know they can be here for their entire university career, and they know that they will have projects along the way that are only their thing that they're responsible for or that impact everybody else. Interesting thing though, there was a chapter called ethical fading, which we'll talk about, and the Navy SEALs are a great example always. I'm going to step aside from the book. Another one that I heard, there was a guy who applied, and I don't think this was Jocko Willink. I think somebody else wrote this, but this guy applied for a job. He applied for transfer to a particular unit, and he used as a referee one of the guys he knew was a non-commissioned officer in the unit. So the guy who took the application went to him and asked him, and this is somebody who had been known for skirting the rules a bit where he was
Yeah.
before. So he went and asked this other guy, "You know him? Do we want him?" The guy said to him, "Tell him he's not welcome here."
Yeah.
And that's the thing we talked about it a while back, but in terms of ethical fading, it's like making things okay because you want something so badly that, or you need something so badly that you'll do things that are out of the ordinary for that one. Somebody comes to you at the end of the year and they go, "Oh, I've used my insurance, but I need to get this. My sister still has some. Can you do it?" And you go, "Oh,
Oh,
geez,
yeah.
it's really slow month." Well, no, you can't because you're not her. But it's this slow degradation of morals where you'll do something and then unbeknownst to you, the people around you see it and they think that's okay. And then gradually the culture of the place and the culture of the cause and so on slips and eventually you become something totally different to what you were before.
Well, basically,
Um,
what they're doing is they're chasing short term profits.
yeah,
They're going to do the wrong thing for short term profits, whereas the ethical leadership is you'll sacrifice short term profits to make sure you're doing the right thing.
yeah,
Because, like you
that,
said, your team is watching you. If
yeah,
you do the wrong thing, then they'll go, okay, well, if you can do that, it means we can do the wrong thing, not just in that case, but we can do the wrong thing in
yeah.
other areas because we all do, yeah, that people are taking shortcuts.
Yeah, I remember a story once of a guy saying where this father was called into school because the kid had been stealing pens. And the father said, "I don't know what he needs to steal pens for. I bring plenty home from work." Uh,
uh, okay, so Richard, I'm just looking at the time.
okay.
Want to keep this nice and tight. Is there anything you want to finish on with this particular book before we wrap up, other than
I
telling
mean,
everyone they should read it?
they should read it. Look, I think the like most books, it's front loaded and it will give you the idea quite early on. But the thing that I liked was that it's very well reinforced with a number of stories throughout, business examples where people did something in the right way or the wrong way. And it's not just they did this, you shouldn't. There's the example of Kodak, who had the world's first digital camera. And
Yeah.
as you know, these days the phrase Kodak moment is something which is historical value only. But it's like oil companies being afraid of the electric car. Eventually, change will come. So you've got a choice. You can either encourage it and embrace it and go with it and be excited by it, or you can fear it and try and hold it off as long as possible and come up with the best reasons why it'll never work. And then when it does work, eventually people will forget to ask you what you thought about the next thing. So
Mm.
what I would suggest is that, as we said before, nothing has ever changed as fast as it's changing now, and it's never going to change as slowly again. So I think the best thing you can do is to be open to the fact that if you don't change what you're doing when you see that it's going to need to be changed eventually, somebody else will. One last thing, I am conscious of time, but
Yeah, no, that's all right.
there will be a time, and I'm predicting this now just to upset everybody, but there will be a time when you can pop your iPad on the floor, it'll watch you walk, you can scan yourself on the iPad, and the app that you've signed up to will fax some orthotics to your 3D printer. And you'll, like I said a while back, your friend will then hack it so that you can get a few extra pairs and so on. You won't need to involve anybody, and for a lot of people, that will be okay. So we've got to start making ourselves relevant enough that people still need us for the
Mm.
future. And the only way to do that is to say it's not always going to be like this. I don't know very many people who still take a plaster cast, and I know even fewer who still make their own orthotics. And things will not be this way forever. So if you don't look to the future, you're going to be very surprised and very unhappy. So I think read the book and ignore my pessimist outlook. It's actually not, but I think things will be better, but in order for them to be better, they will definitely change. The only thing that is constant is that they're not staying constant.
Yeah, that is true. But yeah, no, I enjoyed the book. I thought it was good. And like you said, it is front loaded. Like you get through the first part of the book and it's really covering most of the concepts, but it's the stories
Yeah,
that tie them all in at the end. So Richard, I want to thank you very much for The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek. And I look forward to talking again very soon.
absolutely. Look forward to
Okay,
it.
see
Thanks
you
for having
later.
me on again.
Okay,
Take it
bye.
easy. Bye.